Verneé, welcome to the podcast. We really appreciate you sharing your time with us. And really what we want to spend some time with you about is learning what you guys are doing to help create conditions in which youth can thrive, particularly with your focus on this combination of caring, community, with a focus on equitable access to educational opportunities. So I want to start out with each of you sharing a little bit about the work you do, some of the what really gets you up in the morning excited, and what are the things that are challenges for you, and then engage in some kind of conversation about how you amplify the good and address the challenges. So Verneé, I was wondering if you could start with the work you do in Chicago.
Sure, happy to do so. My name is Verneé Green, as you said. I'm the CEO of MICFA Challenge, which is an organization that was started off in Chicago and now has very much a national reach. I am a former Chicago public school teacher. I'm really proud of that. So excited to be leading our work, which is really to develop young people to be informed, engaged, and active civic leaders who will promote a just and equitable society. And we do that work in two ways. We have some staff who work directly with young people. We run some student advisory councils here in Chicago that have relationships with the CEO of schools, as well as some of the safety and justice leaders in the city of Chicago. And then in order to really expand our reach, we work directly with teachers who then can use our curriculum in their classrooms. And that's actually a lot of what I'll probably talk about today, is how we support and train teachers to build what we call democratic classrooms, so that they're building community and empowering students to feel a sense of community and feel heard in their classrooms. So I don't know if that answered all your questions.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so when you get up in the morning, so it's early for you in Chicago today, and what are the things that you say, I'm so happy, I'm so excited to do what, and why? And what?
Yeah, and this is actually a good morning to think of that. Last night I was we have a mayoral election in Chicago, and I was at a candidates forum with two young people, and waiting to ask questions of the candidates. And one of the young people, young black male, when he walked into the TV studio, he looked and then saw the candidates walk in, and Reverend Jesse Jackson was in, and lots of different civic leaders in Chicago. He turned to me and he goes, "This is the coolest thing ever. I cannot believe that I have this opportunity to be in this space." And that for me is like what is most exciting is I was that kid. I actually met Reverend Jackson when I was in high school. In St. Louis. So to have this like full circle moment where, opportunities that teachers brought to me, especially things that just couldn't, happen necessarily in the classroom, being able to bring some of these extended opportunities to students is something that I get really jazzed about, because it's what made me me. So it's like making future leaders is something that I feel really passionate about, and so that's what gets me up in the morning. So I'm as excited. I get just really filled up yesterday from his excitement.
That's great. So I go and ask a question a conversation that I'm engaged in a lot of different communities, is that you get this great story about all the work you're doing, and then here's this moment, this moment that brings it alive when this young man says, "Oh wow, this I can see why this is meaningful and get going." You have your story of how this was an important part, motivating for you. And so many of my friends would say, "See, it's about serving the individual. It's getting that opportunity for the individual. Why are we talking about the system?" It's about getting individuals to be resilient and overcome, find themselves, grow. This is as you know, the conversation and the back and forth between social emotional learning, the character conversation. These are theories of the world. So how do you think through the power of that individual experience with a theory of the need for system change?
Yeah, well, one, because this individual and even these two students who were with me last night are part of a larger group. They're part of one of our youth councils. And they both, as they walked away, were like, "We can't wait till we get back to council next week so that we can share with everybody else what we saw and learned," as well as they talked a lot about like my parents, have not either been engaged or have been engaged, and now I have this additional information. So they see themselves as players within the
Mm-hmm.
system. The other piece is that, at least in Chicago, the mayor controls a lot of the various systems, the education system.
Yep.
They appoint the CEO of schools, they appoint the superintendent of, police. A lot of the systems that impact young people
Mm-hmm.
are
Mm-hmm.
decided by that one election. And so
Mm-hmm.
really
Mm-hmm.
helping young people to see the role that they play, or the role
Mm-hmm.
of these individuals play in all of the ecosystems
Mm-hmm.
that impact the transportation system, how they got home, last
Mm-hmm.
night, excuse me, is impacted by that one election. And so we very much teach them, and it's just critical that they understand the place that the individual plays in the entire city and in the entire system, and how that vote contributes to what happens in the larger city.
So would you be comfortable with an emphasis on the both and? That we
Oh,
get this either
absolutely.
or, that it's really a both and, that you can't say, I'm just going to work with individuals and get them strong so they can take on the system. It's also, how do we think about system change? And those both have to be operational in order for us to really create conditions which kids can thrive.
Absolutely. And I'll give you another example. I took a year off after being a counselor to work in public policy. I was working on a master's degree, and I had a policy job. And at first I was like, oh, I'm burnt out from schools. Everybody gets that to that
Yeah,
point.
yeah, yeah.
And I went and worked in policy. But during that time, and I was working on transportation policy here in the state of Illinois, and I was realizing that there was a new train line that was coming to the neighborhood in which I had just been a teacher, and how that was impacting housing costs in that neighborhood, how that was impacting access to jobs. And I stayed in that role for about a year and a half and went back to schools because I wanted students to understand that there were systems around them. There were people making decisions about their very life while they were in school doing homework and going to practice and all of those other things.
Yep.
People were making decisions about them and their lives that were going to impact them, and they had no idea. They had no knowledge of that. And all of the housing, transportation, all the things that were barriers to a lot of things that students were bringing to me, as their teacher and then later as their guidance counselor, were coming up because they were systems that were making, like I said, decisions and impacting them directly. So I went back into education, into the classroom after that experience with policy, because I felt like I had more information and could be more effective in messaging to the students how they needed to be concerned. So again, my time at MIC was very much a full circle moment from all of that.
Yeah, wow. So I'm going to turn to Andrew, because that you kind of gave him this idea, the idea that there's the value of a lived civics education in terms of helping our children find their voice in the system is central. So Andrew, I want to turn to you and ask you if you could share the work you're doing, and again, what excites you about getting going in the day.
Absolutely. Andrew Wilkes, work at Generation Citizen as the Chief Policy and Advocacy Officer. And in many ways, Generation Citizen is kind of has a sisterly spirit to what MIC for Challenge does. So it's great to be in conversation with all of y'all today. A big part of what Generation Citizen does, continuing the thread of the conversation, is working to make sure that students as rising young leaders can get access to a comprehensive, hands-on, project-based action civics education. So there's a classroom component that we're doing in about 8 states across the country, working to coach teachers to make sure that they're prepared to lead dynamic, exciting classroom experiences. But then there are also 2 other components that speak to the systems change dimension that we spoke about, one of which is working on policy advocacy and field building to make sure that social studies standards and legislation federally and at the state level creates conditions conducive for action civics and in some ways a wider form of civics education to take place. But then thirdly, youth civic leadership development, making sure that young folks feel supported and have the skill building that strengthens their youth civic leadership journey. But also making sure that they can be scaffolded into opportunities to self-advocate for changes that they want to see in systems, to make their issues that they choose, to make some traction on those things. Sometimes that's education policy, other times it's mental health. So really excited to be with you today, Hardin, and hopefully it gives a bit of a snapshot of some of what we're up to.
So two questions. One, what would you say excites you in the morning about coming to the work you do? What draws you to that and rings your bell?
So many things. What rings the bell? I love the way you posed the question. I'll start with what I particularly love now in the springtime is a moment where a lot of state legislatures are considering education policy, things from what funding levels will be for schools to will we start a civics education commission or a SEALS program. So I'm really excited to have an opportunity pretty frequently to interact with legislators, chiefs of staff, policy aides, which is part advocacy and sometimes, honestly, part education, because our lawmakers can't be abreast of every single issue and all its granularity. And so I have an opportunity sometimes to come alongside folks and to say, well, here may be an opportunity to strengthen instructional practice, or this may be an opportunity to make sure we take a more holistic approach to civics and government.
So a question for both of you. The logic of what you do is so powerful. Helping youth understand what are the systems how they can be active, engaged citizens. Helping teachers prepare conditions in which they can learn and practice those skills. And then working with the larger system to kind of enact legislation and facilitate conditions for this type of action civics to be available to all kids makes just a lot of sense, right? I mean, it's a lot of logic. What are the source of resistance to this work, or the barriers for more universal implementation of the type of opportunity for civic engagement that you provide for youth? What are the barriers for that? And what are and barriers is one thing, but also resistance. Where does that live?
Really, really great question. I can maybe start, and then I'm sure Verneé will hop in here as well. In terms of resistance, I think a part of what we see a lot of at Generation Citizen is making sure folks understand that Action Civics is a youth-led student agency emphasizing approach to pedagogy and instructional practice. And so it's not as though teachers are unilaterally determining the issues which students actually themselves are selecting. So that's one thing that note. But the other piece is that, and this is a way of perhaps addressing the barrier as well as how to kind of transcend it in some ways. Highlighting the Action Civics actually cuts across building civic knowledge, civic dispositions, and civic participatory skills rather than only building civic participatory skills. And so the degree to which Action Civics builds analytic capacity through youth participatory research is one way, for instance, that students develop an informed critical thinking approach to democracy. And so that's an area of constant underscoring and underlining to make sure people see the full picture.
How about you, Verneé, from where you sit, what are the barriers and challenges that you engage in terms of extending your work and across more schools and more areas?
Yeah, I agree with the comments that Andrew made. Also, again, acknowledging the very connection that the two organizations have. We serve on a lot of committees and panels together, and have a lot of sort of overlap in the approaches that we are taking. I would say just one additional barrier is just the resistance to social studies education it's a huge barrier. Historically, it's not been an area that, a lot of schools, focus on what's being tested. And in a lot of ways, social studies is not, a testing area. There are state standards and improvements have made certainly since I've been in the classroom, when it really didn't matter what I taught because it wasn't a testing area. So no one cared, but it still doesn't have the attention, student I don't know if people always make the connection between literacy and social studies and writing and social studies, and many of the skills that they want students to have are often taught in social studies and civics classrooms. So just that is one huge barrier to the work. Also, the money, the funding allotted to it. There's a very vast difference in the investment made in social studies and civics education at a federal level, the funding that is given to schools for that subject matter. So, you do what's measured and you do what you have money for. And so, there's so much, a significant amount. I think it's 5 cents versus $50 per student. Compare, social studies and civics, if you compare it to some of the STEM topics. And so making sure that people make space for this kind of instruction. And it's hard when there's not an incentive to make space for this kinds of instruction, whether it's because it's related to a standardized test or the actual standards or money. And then, as Andrew mentioned, there's just a black backlash in this country at this moment around history, as well as around action civics, as well as around having students in some ways be free thinkers. Even last night in the conversation I was having with the young people, our mayoral candidates have very different opinions around safety. And one of the young people said, I don't think they have a shared understanding of what safety is and what safety means to me as a young person. And it wasn't any kind of thing that I fed to her. She sat in the debate, listened to the conversation, came and thought about how it impacted her life. And that's happening in classrooms across the country, where young people are absorbing the news, absorbing the curriculum, thinking about how that impacts them directly, and are formulating, their own thoughts and opinions. And it's being spun as they are being coached to move in a particular area. And some of that, quite frankly, is adultism. We don't think that young people can have these kind of thoughts and are able to think critically, when we find in our work, even as young as kindergarten, when we bring issues to young people, they are able to, again, think about it in the context. They bring their own expertise to that topic. They bring their own experience to that topic. They build empathy by talking to one another in their classrooms and hearing the things that are most important to their classmates and colleagues, and able to form opinions really, really well. But there's a lot of negative attention around action civics that's being labeled as something that it's quite frankly not.
So I hear in that one of the challenges to your work is a adult discomfort with well-developed student voice, and that a theory of children being able to understand their values, understand what they believe in, and take action to acquire it makes some adults anxious. And I want to leave, and I really appreciate the fact that you've let out, you're not using the political labels to describe that process. We know what those are. But am I hearing that correctly? That there is a deep discomfort in many areas with a well-developed student voice and what that may mean.
I think there's deep discomfort in just a well-engaged citizenry, and it starts with young people, and yeah, I would agree with that.
How about you, Andrew? How do you see that?
I agree with both of those points. I think there's a measure of discomfort with well-developed student voice, discomfort to Verneé's great elaboration with a well-engaged citizenry. And I think the opportunity there is to elevate the importance and the impact of cross-generational partnership for informed democracy. When teachers and students work together, when elders in community and young folks that are beginning to discover and activate their voice work together, that's the best of democracy in motion. And so highlighting that as what we want to move towards, I think, is the opportunity.
Yeah.
And I'll say, we're not trained, again, I'm going to use my teacher hat. We're not necessarily trained um, to deal with conflict and, hearing different perspectives and coming from you know, different sides is conflict. And so a lot of it's managing someone who thinks this way versus someone who thinks this way, and creating space for them to have that healthy debate, that healthy discourse, that healthy conversation. And that's hard. And again, I won't just say teachers aren't trained. As individuals, many
Yeah.
of us are conflict averse, and so having hard conversations, hearing someone else's perspective that may feel different from yours without taking it personally, like all of that is, it's a higher level skill. And that's hard to contain when there are 25 different voices that bring different perspectives in. But that's also where the learning takes place. So being a facilitator of that discussion versus, standing in front and directing where someone's thoughts go, it's a different skill set. And we spend a lot of time supporting and coaching teachers to be able to create that environment, because that's also how students become engaged. Now, when
Yep.
they feel that the information, the curriculum is just given to them and they've got to digest it and take it, it's different when it's like, no, actually, let me hear your perspective, what you think, and let me hear your arguments and why you see the world or this particular matter, or this material in
Mhm.
this way. Challenge me. That's a different skill set and a different comfort zone too.
This is very exciting. One of the motivations for this podcast was my lived experience of spending time in the equity world, spending time in the character development world, spending time in the civics world, and then spending time in the social emotional learning world. Right, and there's four worlds all around kid development, thriving children. We all want very similar outcomes, but somehow they don't. There's not a conversation that the Venn between those four groups somehow doesn't live well among in particularly as we look at the structures of schools. But as I listen to your conversation about what the work that you do around action civics, students learning how to hear their own values, their own experience, begin to learn how to have difficult conversations with each other, how to see how they can take action, sounds exactly to me like what the conversation about how do we create environments in which kids belong. Belonging and connection and community is a huge issue in the social emotional learning world and in a lot of schools. And then when you get in conversation with people about doing equity in schools, it's often how do we get the parents to be engaged and the kids and find student voice. And I'm wondering whether you, in your world, how you find ways to interact with those groups of thinking about how action civics could be part of the academic home for belonging, difficult conversations, sense of engagement in my school and my community, all of which we know when kids have, they're better prepared to perform in schools and move on, to find their careers, be life ready. So how do you, am I making that up or am I just imposing, that is my, I would love the answer to be yes, but I don't want to impose my ideas on you. So does that make sense? And if so, where could those different groups find space to spend more time working proactively together?
Yeah, I can tackle the first part and think a little bit about the second. From the first part, yes, I think the way that we approach our work, we feel like it's just good teaching. It's not just
Mm-hmm.
teaching of civics. And we've had teachers across academic concentration areas use some or all of our curriculum just to set up a strong classroom. We have
Mm-hmm.
building community is important, and at the beginning of a school year, helping students to find their voice and to find belonging at the beginning, because if they don't do that, then they're not interested in the subject matter. And so I agree with you. We've worked with a lot of schools that have just said these are just good teaching practices,
Yep.
and no
Yep.
matter what you teach, we should be using this content. Helping a young person find their voice is a skill that takes them all the way through. One of my um, theories is that, and I haven't proven it, I'm still waiting on an academic study, is that the skills they learn through our work at Mikva Challenge are the skills that will help them persist through college and career, because it is
Yep.
that agency, it's that advocacy, is that sense of, being a Black student on a majority white campus, how do I feel that I belong here? How do I develop the skills to go and ask my professor questions? How do I show up at office hours? How do I lift my voice in a classroom with people who may look like me or may not, may have different experiences than I do? And that's not, it's not necessarily the content, but it is about being an engaged citizen, an engaged civic leader. And so
Mm-hmm.
what we have
Mm-hmm.
learned and what
Yep.
we have seen is that through this work, this is just good teaching. And again, teachers in science, teachers and gym teachers, several have said, I use the content and the curriculum to help me set the structure for a positive, social emotionally focused classroom where students feel like they belong, have agency, are engaged. So I completely agree with you there, and have
Mm-hmm.
heard that from teachers as well as district leaders.
Mm-hmm. Great. Great. How about you, Andrew? How do you resolve that challenge?
Yeah, I'd say that the same. We released a report some years ago on action civics, and insights from district leaders, where we interviewed about 11 district leaders across the country, a lot of them social studies leads, some superintendents. And a part of what we saw is that action civics is related through some of the interviews and anecdotal conversations we held, with belonging, with connection, with also things like bridging, forging hard fought consensus in the classroom, and making sure that the wider school culture also helps what happens in the classroom to get legs. So principals, district leaders, social studies staff, where they exist in districts, have capacity for that, can all help for these skills to be formed in the schoolhouse, but then migrate to the workplace, to participation in other community venues. I think there's absolutely a connection there. And then to your other point about active civics potentially being an academic home for these worlds,
Yep.
SEL, civics, um, and other dimensions of development. I think there is a natural convergence and home of those things in action civics, as well as action civics speaking to those dimensions of our life and society as well.
Yeah. Is part of that, and I hope I don't step into it here, is part of that focusing on the conversation about equity, about drawing a clarity between saying um, it's not just a conversation about outcomes, it's really about having transparent access to opportunity. And that's what equity, how do we make sure that it's clear to all families and children in our schools that they have access to opportunity, and the barriers to that access are systematically removed, and that's the core of equity, and that a action civics curriculum help our students and faculty understand how in their immediate context and others they can remove those barriers to access, as opposed to a important but maybe distracting for some focus on equity is really just about minority student achievement.
Mm, mhm, mhm.
I'm wondering. You can hear the things that the narratives and
Yeah.
how they impact decisions and engagement. We've both been in communities where that when the equity voice comes up, there are people who lead, who agree with our outcomes because it feels like we've changed the conversation.
Yeah, and part of what I'm thinking is, when we talk about our work, we're not just talking, and we're not just saying Action Civics is for minority students and for Black and Brown youth, for young people in rural areas. We've had lots of discussions in some of the work that we do in Upper Michigan and rural areas in New Hampshire, where we've been able to use our curriculum and work with teachers and again amplify voices, help to amplify voices and create opportunities for students in spaces that where they feel unheard or devalued, all of that. And it's not just around lines of race. It's the investment in young people in rural areas is just as important. And I will say, and I don't want to limit it to it. I'm not sure. I think I'm skating away from your question a little bit, but there are young people in well-resourced areas who also have used the Action Civics curriculum, have used our curriculum, and have gained perspective and have also felt like they've been able to be challenged and heard and pushed. And at the same time, because we've had several events where we brought all of those groups together, and that to me is powerful. When you hear students from well-resourced schools, you hear students from urban areas, you hear students from rural areas all talking about the same issue. Their approach to mental health, their perspective on mental health may be different, but they're all impacted by it. And I say mental health because it is one of the issues, and Andrew, you mentioned this as well, that raises to the top when you ask students, when you ask teachers, what's the issue that you are most impacted by? Mental health rises to the top very easily. They may all come into that conversation because again, you start as an individual with your own perspective. As they do some research, and that's where we push them to, they gain a different understanding. But then when you bring those three groups together and hear them talk across those lines of difference, which is one of my favorite parts of the work too, is to bring young people who are different together and to hear them talk about their schools and then develop this empathy for one another and then begin to work together to think about whether that's collectively why we have them together, but most especially when they walk away and go back into their respective spaces, they have a perspective that is different. So it's not getting to your equity question, but it does focus on the equity of making sure that the work that we do is not limited to a particular region or a particular area, which unfortunately some of the policies are forcing that to happen. There are areas where we cannot do Action Civics because of the political climate, and it's actually a loss to us as a country to do that.
Would love to hop in there and first echo and a hearty point of agreement to everything that Verneé has shared. Would share to your question, Hardin, about equity. I think it has to do not only with a concern towards access to opportunity, but also with a concern for the whole, for the collective, and inclusion as well. And so a part of what I think civics does, and Action Civics in particular, is to create space for folks across dimensions of race, across dimensions of place, across increasingly where folks enter in terms of being multilingual, but also helping to strengthen other parts of the civic learning continuum. And so Action Civics helps to build media literacy and helps to build facility and discussing current events and other key aspects of civics, simulations of democratic procedures. One of the things that our teachers do with a lot of students is understanding how the Constitution is designed and how it's worked, and also creating your own kind of Constitution to get a sense of checks and balances in real time, and some of those key dimensions of how to design political systems. And so I think making sure that that kind of dynamic hands-on education doesn't just happen in well-resourced districts, but happens in every kind of district, regardless of staffing, regardless of funding, really helps to elevate a sense of belonging everywhere. And so that kind of universal frame that you mentioned earlier, I think is important. But the second thing that I share, which is also something that has kind of brought all of us together in some ways, Generation Citizen has been leading a multi-stakeholder initiative around equity in civics, which is really based on using research and things like listening tours, having conversations with communities that are directly engaged, students, parents, educators, so that we can elevate their insights and their context expertise, along with the content expertise that some of us may be bringing, so that we can mix them all together. And hopefully the result is more equitable, more democratic school cultures and better civic learning for everyone.
So I want to thank you so much for your time. And I know this is a conversation we could do for a much long time. I look forward to the committees we're working together to deepen this work. I want to leave with a question that I'm stealing and modifying from Ezra Klein. So what are the 3 things, either a book, an essay, a podcast, a video, a movie, that you recommend people listen to deepen their understanding of the work that you all do around action civics in a way that is transformative for either the youth involved or the communities in which they live? So what are the 3 things that you would recommend our listeners to pick up? So Andrew, I'll let you go first.
Sure. Thank you, Hart, for cutting through the musing that Verneé and I both did. The first that I'd note, because I think it responds to those who may have good faith points of understanding, good faith points of inquiry around action civics. There's the article in the Constitutionalist called "Action Civics Should Be Celebrated, Not Banned." That's one I'd include. A second piece that I would include that I think speaks powerfully. There is a report that we did some time ago called Through an Action Civics Lens. It's kind of a 50-state report of the different degrees of not only action civics, but experiential participatory civics happening at the standards level, through laws, through different branches of government, so through courts as well. So we'll lift that up as a resource. And then thirdly, it's always tricky to complete the triad. I would name, there's a podcast that our CEO, Elizabeth Clay Roy, did some time ago, where she talked really powerfully about how civics builds collaboration across sectors. The name of it escapes me, but she does public facing engagement on civics so powerfully that I feel confident saying anything that she does. Great entry point.
Great, thanks. How about you, Verneé?
I'm like you, Andrew. I was like, I've definitely got 2. It's the third one. There are researchers at DePaul University, Molly Andalina and Hillary Conklin, wrote a white paper for AERA in 2019, Fostering Democratic and Social Emotional Learning in Action Civics Program, Factors that Shape Students' Learning, from Project Soapbox, which is one of the signature programs in our curriculum. That's one that I would definitely recommend. We always send that out to folk as they are trying to understand our work. The second may be a little bit selfish. MICFA Challenge website, I would encourage people to come, just because we have a number of videos and other materials for people to see and experience the work. You actually get to hear directly from young people can filter through and watch them, deliver a soapbox speech. There are some videos from, some of our gatherings. There's a video about student voice committees in Rochester, New York. So just some really interesting ways to see and experience the work that we do. So McFaChallenge.org, have to be selfish and
Great,
do
great.
a
No,
play,
yeah.
there. And then I'm actually looking, as you're asking the question, I keep coming back to, because I believe Angelina and Conklin did two pieces of research and update. That's the one that keeps coming back. Can I uh, offer up the third? I'm like Andrew, like there's another one on the tip of my tongue. Can I offer up a
Yeah,
third as a follow up that
yeah.
can send and submit later?
That'd be great. That'd be great. Well, once again, I want to thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate that, and I deeply value the work you guys do.
Thank you.
And I know that this is, when we look back on our history, it's people like yourselves who are in their communities, working hard, collaborating across different places that drives our democracy. So thank you for your service.
Thank you so much. The third, I would say the third I was thinking about was just anything related to Tufts University's circle, just because there's a lot of research on just student data, student voting, what happens when students feel engaged. And
Yeah,
so I don't have a particular study to cite, but we often connect with their work and use their research as we
great.
try to amplify, it shows sort of the long-term impact of working collaboratively with students and empowering them, how they stay becoming civil. You know me with my late processing. It's like it's coming, but just
Yeah,
studies
that's
out of
it.
circle are important as well.
That's great. Two great resources. So thank you very much. Hope you have a great day. And I know that I'll be seeing you soon in one of our meetings. So looking forward to it.
Thank you for the
Awesome.
opportunity. Really appreciate that. Andrew, always happy to be connected in this way. So thank you.
Same, Verneé. And enjoy Hardin.
Yep. Take care. Bye bye.
All right.